When it comes to self-development, no matter the method you use, the vital point is to practice. If you're ready to transform your life and claim the potential inside of you, you are in the right place. Welcome back to the Vital Point Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Schechter. As a transformation coach and breathwork facilitator, I'm invested in making the dynamic landscape of personal evolution accessible. My goal is to inspire you to take action for yourself because you have the capacity to evolve and bring your intentions and dreams into the world. And there's never been more access to so many incredible modalities that can help you on your journey. This podcast will help you learn simple methods you can use to transform your life and share the stories of practitioners who are doing the work so that you feel inspired to go and practice, because that's the vital point. My guest on this episode of the podcast is Christine Dixon. She's known as the Ordinary Sacred on social media. She's many things, but most importantly for this conversation is an IFS coach. If you're not familiar, IFS stands for Internal Family Systems and is a very powerful framework for exploration of self. I found it very helpful for my own psychedelic integration and something that comes up continuously for me in various integration circles that I participate or facilitate. Christine's first episode on the podcast here was episode 23. It's still one of the most popular episodes. Christine shares so much wisdom in this episode. And in fact, there's one point where I'm just kind of blown away because some of the things that she explains are things that took me several years of therapy to really get, to really understand. And so to have her summarize and share in such a clear and eloquent way is just a blessing. And I'm just so grateful to her for the way that she shows up, for the value that she provides to people through her content, through her different offerings. So amazing. And just a, great reminder that when we're doing this inner work, we need to have some sort of framework, some sort of method for us to understand and unpack and interpret our experiences that are coming up. And I really think that internal family systems is a very powerful method in that regard. And I hope that this episode inspires you to go and learn more about it, especially if you're doing work with plant medicines and psychedelics. It's a wonderful way of really becoming more whole as far as accepting more of yourself. And not only do we get into IFS, we talk a bit about meditation and something else that's become very important to me in the last year, nonviolent communication. And most importantly, in this episode, we get into the fact that you make sense. All of your parts make sense. And it's in this acceptance and reconnection and reparenting some of these parts that have been neglected or exiled that some very deep healing occurs. It's about letting go of judgment and rejecting or pushing these parts away and having exploration and curiosity around those parts. And I think that this is so important as far as psychedelic integration, because the fact is that working with psychedelics and plant medicine by themselves isn't just going to solve your problems like automatically, right? In fact, having these macro experiences can really stir things up inside. They might bring things that have been suppressed or pushed down to the surface. And I think that that is one area where IFS really does a good job. Because IFS says that we have these different parts within ourselves. Oftentimes, some of these parts have not been accepted. They've been exiled or they're being managed by other parts of us, right? In other words, we have aspects of ourselves that are not safe. And so for me, really exploring some of these exiled parts, getting to know them, asking them questions, being curious about what they want, what their needs are, that often come up in in terms of projections of feeling triggered, having things come up on like a very deeply uncomfortable level and being able to work with them has been really healing and really helpful to me. So this episode is just amazing. I think it's a really quintessential episode of the podcast in that there is a practice for you to, try out that you can add into your integration tool belt right off the bat. And that we're really talking about some very important skills and methods for integrating our inner work, whether that's psychedelics, whether that's breath work, whether that's some sort of shadow or inner child work that you've been doing. I really think that this episode is going to be helpful. So before we get into the conversation with Christine, I'd just like to mention that just like psychedelics by themselves aren't just going to solve all your problems, it's about having the resources and the tools to help us process, to help us sit with whatever's coming up. For me, one of the most important resources that I've learned to use to support myself in this type of exploration is my breath. I'm in the process right now of soft launching my 6-week coaching program called Breathwork for Integration, which is designed to help you unlock the power of your breath, offering you improved clarity, equanimity, and a deeper connection to your inner guiding intelligence. These are all key elements to getting the most from intentional work with psychedelics and plant medicine, as well as just feeling more regulated in your nervous system, having more awareness of your thoughts and your body, and providing a very grounded way for you to explore expanded states of consciousness, whether that includes psychedelics or not. You can book a call with me at calendly.com/Blue Magic Alchemy. It's free. Happy to talk about how I can support you and whether we're a good fit to work together. And, whether you're ready to take the next step on your path of self-care. So again, reach out to me at calendly.com/Blue Magic Alchemy. And to say thank you for supporting the podcast, mention that you heard about the program here, and I'll take 20% off the price should we decide to move forward and working together. So just keep in mind that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single breath. I look forward to breathing with you. I look forward to hearing your thoughts about this amazing episode of the Vital Point podcast with Christine Dixon. Enjoy.
Yeah, I was saying that my 3 greatest values are compassion, freedom, and practicality. What actually works. And when I would try to, at the beginning, meditate for 10 minutes, I couldn't do it. And so I found that just starting with 90 seconds, 30 seconds was so helpful, right? To the little bit that my system would allow. So something that I usually start my IFS support group with every week is what I call a noticing practice. And so I want to invite you, Jonathan, and anyone listening, maybe to just take a moment. The first thing is to just look outside of you and notice whatever you see, whatever you hear, whatever you feel in your body, maybe the temperature of the air around you, whatever you might smell or taste. And really what you're doing is you're bringing yourself into this moment to kind of check if you're safe. And if you are safe, if you feel comfortable enough, then in IFS, we call it a YOU turn, where you can come back into yourself and turn in the inner world. And so we've kind of turned that lens of noticing outside for a moment, come into this space to see if it's safe, and then now we're going to turn that lens on the inside. And so I invite you to just feel your body in this space. Feel where you have contact, maybe with a chair or a bed or the floor. Feel the earth supporting you. Maybe notice your breath. And then we're just going to notice what I call our pets, our physical sensations, emotional energy, and thoughts. And often I'll ask people, what's alive in you right now? Healing always occurs in this moment as we can bring curiosity and compassion to whatever is here now. And this skill of just noticing is huge. So just taking a moment, noticing whatever you notice in your body. And there might be strong sensations, there might be just subtle rumblings in your tummy or itching, tension. And there's no fixing, there's just noticing. And you might notice a part that wants to fix, a part that's anxious. And that's okay too. We notice that. You might notice sometimes a sadness that arises, or a sleepiness, or a sense of overwhelm, maybe an excitement. Again, whatever is true for you, whatever is here now in this moment. And then you might observe your thoughts, your mind, just maybe they're thinking, this is ridiculous, why are we doing this? Or distracted by something around you, thoughts about what just happened before you listen to this, what's coming. And just inviting all of these things in like they're guests, like they're little ones that are gathering around you. And you might imagine noticing, I see you rumbling in my tummy, you're welcome here. I see you thought about what just this conversation I just had, you're welcome here. I see you a little bit of sadness, tiredness, you're welcome here. And just imagine them gathering around you or in your lap, taking a breath and letting them be here with you right now. And so this is what I call a welcoming practice. In IFS, we say all parts are welcome. And it's really this practice that we do even for 10 seconds at a time throughout the day. Turn inside. What's here with me now? I'm here with you. It's okay for you to be here. So that's the practice. You can do it for 10 seconds or longer if you want in any given moment.
Thank you so much for that. Feels so different in just a couple of minutes. It's so great.
Yeah. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be long. It really can be, because a lot of our parts, our protective parts, are understandably very afraid for us to go inside because there might be things that we'll find there that are overwhelming, emotions that have been held down for a long time. And so we might say, okay, I'm just going to go in for 10 seconds and then you can pull me back out. But it's like releasing a little pressure cooker, and there's no fixing. It's not this agenda of, I've got to, those are our figure it out parts. We can welcome them too. Say, I see you. You want to figure it out. You make sense. But just it's like imagining them. Some people will see them as like little people. Other people will just feel energies kind of around them, in their body, around their body, and just saying, I see you. I recognize that you're here right now. And it's amazing that all that our parts or people outside of us ever want is to be seen and heard and valued. So that's what we're doing. And there's such power in that. Not even saying, okay, I'm going to fix what you're worried about, but it's okay for you to be worried. And the worried part goes,
Yeah.
Instead
of spending that energy trying to change it, fighting against it.
Yeah. And that's another part. And you can even see that in front of you, the worried part and the part that's like worried about the worry. I got to fix it. I got to change it. And you can just kind of back up and have enough space for all of it. You can both be here. I get you. I get you both.
Yeah. It's such a, it's such an important thing to remember and reiterate, is that we can do these practices for these shorter amounts of time. And that's something that I see in clients that I'm working with. It, just what you're saying is that the thought of completely changing your life or meditating for 30 minutes or something like that is so overwhelming because of where they're at in this moment and the pain that they feel when they
Hmm.
are going inside. And so, yeah, like the thought of like, oh, I'm just going to shut the world off and be with my thoughts for 20 or 30 minutes, that's pretty scary, and understandably so. And so, switching that and being like, hey, what if we just did this for 10 seconds and I'll be here to bring you back out? Like, I'm not going to leave you, on the inside.
Right,
It's
right.
just so, so important, and on so many different levels. I remember, my main Buddhist teacher, going to see him. This had to be like over 15 years ago, and talking to him about
Mm.
meditation and saying like, well, I can sit there and I can sit and meditate for like an hour, but usually even within that hour, there's maybe 1 or 2 minutes where something like really, like I feel
Mm.
like I'm dropping deeper, I feel like something changing. And he said, well, why are you meditating for an hour? Why don't you just meditate for 5 minutes, like 5 times a day, and really focus on encouraging that moment, like it's quality over quantity.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was such a game changer for me, because here I had been sitting and really making myself miserable in a lot of ways. Like, the body starts to get uncomfortable sitting that long, and
Hmm.
my mind was so all over the place. And so it was like trying to make myself sit still,
Hmm.
rather than really being aware and being with the natural state,
Yeah, yeah.
and not trying to change it so much. More just like flowing with it, like, okay,
Right.
let's be more like water, you know
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And as you say that, I notice like those parts in you and me and a lot of us that are kind of these shoulds of like, this is what it should look like. This is what, looking to like these external authorities of, I should meditate for 30 minutes. I should do it exactly this way.
Uh-huh.
Rather than flowing, like you said, with our own bodies and our own minds in this moment. And I always say, whatever is life giving to you, whatever pulls you toward it, and as little amount that your system will allow, like start with that.
Mm.
Like if you can allow 10 seconds to go inside and be there, start with that. And then don't increase until you want to.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is I think I started, I tried to do the half hour and then I tried to do 10 minutes, couldn't do that. And then I ended up starting with the 10 seconds. And now I sit for about 20 minutes twice a day and I love it. I mean,
Right.
my system craves it. It wants to do it, right? It's not a forcing. And if at any day I feel like I don't have the energy or I don't want to do it, that's okay,
Yeah.
right? Or if it's not a regular time, it's just a time when my system's feeling overwhelmed. It's become almost like an opposite. Before my system was like, stay away from the inner world. And
Uh-huh.
and now it craves it. It wants to go in, but it has to start off and say, I think it's because we need to offer an experiment, a little experiment to the protective parts of us that are afraid of it. They need to gain a little bit of experience. Oh, this isn't so scary. Oh, I can go inside and there is a compassionate higher self that can be there with the pain. Like they really have to experience that
Yeah.
to know that it's okay.
Yeah. For me, the other part of that is, really stressing that our goal with meditation isn't to change as much
Mm-hmm.
as it is to notice and
Right.
have that curiosity, which, we talked so much about last time, and has continued to be such a big force, for me in transformation. But,
Mm-hmm.
like I'll say to people like, you know, you've probably have this idea, and it's like watching their heads nod of like, I'm supposed to be able to clear my mind. I'm supposed to be able to, completely
Mm-hmm.
empty it, or like, become this monk like, figure.
Right.
And that's not realistic. And it's okay to not be realistic. It's okay just to, can we just notice what's happening rather than
Mm-hmm.
like really trying to change it. And the paradox of like that, when we just notice, that's when things actually do start to change.
Right.
But if we go in with like this objective of I'm gonna change this, then it's the most maddening,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
frustrating thing.
When I first learned this was actually, so you mentioned that I was an educational therapist for over 20 years, and I would work with people diagnosed with ADHD. And I felt like it was a superpower, that it was just, the problem was the system didn't support how they were naturally wired. But I would work with them to just notice after the fact, rather than thinking of like, this is something that I have to change, that I have to make myself be different and I have to make myself pay attention. I would have them notice after the fact when they had lost attention. Oh gosh, I noticed that the teacher just talked for a half an hour and I have no idea what she said, and without any judgment, right? Just, oh, I noticed that happened.
Yeah.
Then the natural progression of awareness is that it begins to go back. So then they would start noticing in the middle, I've just lost attention. That's so interesting, right? Again, no judgment, just that's so interesting. And then they would start catching themselves even before. They would say, this is the type of situation in which I'm likely to lose attention. For whatever reason, because I'm so not interested in it, right? And again, there's no judgment. It's like, oh, I make sense. I've noticed that this is the type of situation where I don't have the capacity to pay attention. So what are things that I can do to support myself? Can I ask to get up and walk around? Can I record it? Can I they would begin to help themselves, but there was never any judgment. It was just an observation. And then you would find that, oh, I actually make sense. There's nothing necessarily wrong, but it's actually enlightening, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We make sense. And
Mm-hmm.
just getting that thought into the stream is so transformational, you know.
Yeah.
um I think the way that I relate, or that I've integrated what you just talked about, is almost encouraging, especially people that are real new to mindfulness, is like, really switching that or reframing it from, you what's the inner dialogue that says like, oh, I'm doing this wrong, if when I notice that I've lost the breath, and God, if I must not be doing this right, like noticing that, but like that the point is more the noticing than the perfection. And so
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
almost giving yourself a pat on the back, like you can almost gamify it, of like, yes, I caught it again, like look at how great I'm doing, and
Yeah.
that's more important than the perfection of it, and that's really like even for me, like, like I feel like, okay, I've been meditating for like 20 years. I'm not like exactly new to it. And there's
Mm-hmm.
days where it's so hard for me to meditate and sit there and focus on my breath, Um, so yeah, it's just the thought of perfection is just,
Yeah.
something I want to get rid of.
Well, yeah, and I hear those parts. I I hear that perfection part and the part that wants to get rid of it, and they both make sense, because I was going to say, even those parts that come up that say, I've got to do this right, I'm not doing it right. That part makes so much sense if you think about it, because we are trained from when we're a child that we have to do it right, right?
Mm,
And we're going to get a grade for it, we're going to get a red line through the wrong thing, we're going to get punished if we do it wrong. So like that part that's so fixated on like, am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? Is probably even a young part that really just wants you to succeed. And and so, but being able to tell that part, and this, I say this in my groups all the time, I say, you cannot get it wrong. and I'm saying that to that young part, beloved, you cannot get it wrong, because whatever is true, like there's a saying in IFS that I love, that whatever blocks the way is the way.
Mm.
And so, even if that part is the one blocking the way, and that happens a lot, actually. And it happened early on in my IFS work and with other people that I work with. That's a big part that comes in and blocks the work, that says, oh my gosh, am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? Oh no, I'm doing it wrong. Am I making this up? And so we turn toward that part and we work with that part. Whatever is blocking the way, maybe it's a dissociative part, right? That you're going toward pain and it just takes you out. You're just gone, right? And so we begin to work with that part. Oh my gosh, you make sense. It feels so unsafe to go toward this pain that you have to take us out. Or there's a part that takes us out by binging something, right? Whether it's food or scrolling on social media or something. Again, there's no shame in it. It's just, oh, you're doing this for a reason. So like whatever's there is the way. You can't get it wrong, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you've brought it up a couple of times now, and it's just so important just to talk about this more, I think, is the fact that we do make sense, and that all
Yeah.
the parts of us make sense. And um, I feel like I often read or hear from people, um, especially in the very beginning parts of their sort of healing work,
Mm.
where there's this desire to get rid of the parts, or the parts of themselves that they feel are negative, or have been shamed, or that they don't feel comfortable with. And
Yeah.
yet being able to take people through a journey and witness them coming to this realization that those parts of themselves do make sense, and that they have played a role in our survival, in our safety,
Right.
um, and that's the reason that they're still there doing those jobs,
Yeah.
uh, is just
Mm-hmm.
so crucial to understanding like who we are in totality, and like what motivates us to do the things that we do in the ways that we do them. And
Mm-hmm.
coming into peace with all those parts.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
so it's such a
Yeah.
beautiful thing.
Yeah. There's no, yeah, it's so refreshing, like we were saying earlier, to realize that there's no part of me that doesn't make sense. And there's kind of, maybe you're talking about this, I know I have this with myself and with my clients, where there's this almost aha moment when you realize, wait, healing isn't about like feeling less, it's actually about feeling more. It's
Mm.
about coming to peace with the fact that as a human, I have a body that's going to experience pain, and it's going to experience loss and sadness and anger to protect me, and fear, right? And those responses make sense. And instead of so it's like appreciating all those parts that have pushed our authenticity, or our humanity down in order to help us survive socially, being able to
Mhm.
say thank you for the job you've done. You can, updating them, you can rest now. I appreciate what you've done to help me survive thus far, but what if you experimented with just letting me open that pressure cooker a little bit, and release my natural humanity, my natural emotion. So that's kind of the surprise, I think, is that in healing, sometimes we actually have the capacity to feel more rather than pushing it down.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was listening to our first conversation to kind of refresh, one of the thoughts that I had was exactly what you're saying, that there are times where we have to triage
Yeah.
and remove something, right, from our reality, from our environment, maybe get away from
Mm.
a relationship that's not, serving. But there's also this element that I think is even more important than saying I have to get rid of, that's just being more accepting, like that's becoming more resourced
Mm-hmm.
and having a bigger capacity, in that we can change the relationship to these things,
Yeah.
and um, I think that might be a hard pill to swallow at certain points in the
Mm-hmm.
journey, right? Of
Mm-hmm.
like, well, this might never completely go away, but
Mm-hmm.
you will become more
Mm-hmm.
able to hold it, and you'll
Yes.
become more resourced in being able to work with it, and you'll be able to reframe your relationship with it so that
Yeah.
it doesn't seem so overwhelming or negative. um
Mm-hmm.
it's an interesting place
Yeah.
to kind of come to.
Yeah. Can I give you an example
Yeah,
from
please.
yesterday?
Uh-huh.
um, yeah. So without going into detail, my first husband died by suicide, and so there was this traumatic moment where I get a phone call of this news, and so that's the biggest traumas that I've had. And so I have this trauma response whenever someone calls and it's, kind of out of the blue, or there's just something off about it. My system just panics. It just goes into, an involuntary shaking, can't breathe kind of panic. And so my parents are currently in Austria, and they had sent an email saying they were feeling really ill, and they're in their 70s. And my mom calls from Austria early my morning yesterday, and my body just seeing the call
Right.
starts shaking and panicking. I couldn't answer it because it was shaking. So I send her an email saying, I have a full day, that if it's an emergency, call me back. And then a couple hours later, I see her calling again. And I mean, my whole system just, like I said, it could barely call back. I was just so dysregulated. But in that space, I was able to, well, let me finish this story. So she answers the phone, it's FaceTime, and she's happy and chipper. And she says, I'm doing fine. We're doing fine. And then my whole system just, whew, and I start
Right.
weeping,
Uh-huh.
just weeping from relief. Right. And I think, somebody might look at that and say, what? You're healed? You're having this panic response. You're having this uncontrollable weeping afterward. And what's actually beautiful about it is that there was no judgment from myself about any of that. There was an acceptance and understanding. Oh my gosh, you're so afraid. Shake. You can shake. You can shake.
Yeah.
I get it. I get it. You're so afraid. Right. And then there was the weeping. Oh my goodness. Yes, you're relieved. You're relieved. Yes, I see you. Right. And then there was and then my system was fine, after that. But
Right.
so it's not that my system's not affected by some of those, stimuli, or doesn't get activated, or doesn't still feel the result of some of the trauma. But there's this beautiful self that can hold it and say, oh my goodness, honey, you make sense. And I'm here with you. And it's okay. It's okay for you to shake. It's okay for you to cry. Right. So that's the
Yeah.
difference. There's withness now. Um, yeah. So,
Yeah, and the ability that you have to let yourself express and complete that
mhm,
activation in your system, rather than shaming it or suppressing it, so
right.
that, because we all know that that would just create it coming out in a different way that might not be as um positive or helpful to the person that it gets directed towards, or towards yourself,
Right.
in the ways that you might have self-regulated to try to work with that energy that was still within you. So
Mm-hmm.
like the healthiest, most loving, compassionate thing that you can do for yourself is that expression and that
Right.
completion. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just want to celebrate that. And
Yeah.
also just to say thank you for, being willing to share that vulnerable story.
Yeah. I really think I appreciate that. Thank you. I really think that it's uh, trying to dispel this myth that in healing we somehow don't feel anymore, and that's really in IFS language that's what our managers do, and a lot of modalities prop up the managers, right? Just manage this, which is often used. We do that through shame and through suppression, and just hold it in, just don't do it, and that's a signal to other people that we're okay, right? But like you said, it comes out sideways. It'll come out through illness, it'll come out as rage, it'll make its way out, or feed inside in a sense. And so yeah, it's a paradigm shift really on the inside to say, oh, actually it's a sign of healing that
Yeah.
I'm maybe looking more crazy.
Yeah. So since the last time we spoke, I started my training for somatic experiencing practitioner.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. And I just this last weekend went and did the second module. And the whole, theme of this 4-day training was self-protection. And,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
really framing our nervous system responses as seeing them as these natural self-protective things, and that
Yeah.
they're gifts,
Mm-hmm.
like the ability to keep ourselves protected is a gift, and then the ability to actually express that and to complete it,
Mm-hmm.
um that you really have to feel safe to do that, even when it feels uncomfortable. That your nervous system can be that open to like, okay, I'm going to be here and just let this complete,
Yeah.
really speaks to, those managers and those protective parts,
Mm-hmm.
um, and the trust that you've developed with all your parts, that they
Yeah.
can step out of the way of that and like just let the
Mm-hmm.
natural process be natural and complete. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's been, such a journey. I might have talked about this on the first podcast, but there was a time when the last person I would trust was myself. You know what I mean? But it's because I was so blended. My system learned to protect itself by having a lot of very self-critical parts, very
Yeah.
harsh inner critics. And so I would never trust myself to be compassionate, or to be non-shaming. And so it was really in um, creating a self-compassion practice and learning how to even bring compassion on the critical parts of me, to see that that was not my core curious compassionate self, but it was a part of me that needed compassion, that needed understanding about how it developed, and that it did develop to protect me, right? If
Yeah.
I shame you first, I can keep you in line so that you won't receive the shaming and rejection from other people. And once I'm able to even bring, it's like, to me, the self is like, it just keeps backing up to include anything that's not curious and compassionate and calm and confident, right? Probably in the last episode, we talked about the 8 C's of self. So anything that's not that, we just notice it and we kind of back up. And what's amazing is that core self that is curious and open and non-judgmental and compassionate is really the core of who we are. And if we keep backing up, we will have access to it and the ability to hold all of it and not play favorites, have the equanimity. Oh, you make sense and you make sense, even if they're very opposite parts. So that was kind of a revelation, that continuing to back up so that I could bring that. And now my system trusts nobody more than myself.
Mm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
feels very safe, like you said. And I think you're
Yeah.
right that there has to be this, Dick Schwartz calls it a secure inner attachment, speaking of attachment theory, that even if we've had an insecure attachment with a caregiver, we can have that secure attachment between ourself and all the other parts inside of us. And that's really the base from which we can show up in the world and we can take risks, whether it's with another person or, something that we want to do in the world, or we can risk letting our parts, shake and cry or whatever. It's like this foundation.
Yeah. Yeah. That trust that everything isn't going to completely collapse if I
Mm-hmm.
let this energy express, or I let this part express and get curious about it. Right. So it kind of goes back to that capacity and that resourcing of like, can I let myself fall apart just a little bit,
Yeah.
you
Just
know?
just a little to see what happens.
Right. Yeah. And just having curiosity for that. And yeah, we talked about that on the last show about like continuing to step back with curiosity and like,
Mm-hmm.
instead of rushing into judgment, asking the parts like the question of like, well, what would happen if,
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, you're protecting me for something or you're critical of something, like what would happen if there was criticism, or like what would
Mm-hmm.
happen if you weren't here? What are you trying to keep me safe from?
Mm-hmm.
Just asking these real curious questions and continuing to backtrack until we find that place where we can be curious and open and
Mm-hmm.
non-judgmental and present.
Yeah, and this might be a review from last time, but two of the most important questions in IFS. The first one is, how do I feel toward this part? And that's really assessing for self energy. And that's the process of backing up. Because if you notice, that you have a pain in your body or an anxiety or an anger, and you say, how do I feel toward this? Now there's two, right? There's the one feeling something toward it. And anything other than the 8 C's, I feel frustrated with it. I want it to go away. I'm tired of it, right? We can back up and say, oh, okay, now there are two parts in a relationship, one that's feeling anxious and another one that's really tired of it and wants it to go away. Okay, now I see both of you. How do I feel toward you? I really hate you. You both are causing so much problems in my system. Okay, there's another part that's reacting to the conflict of those. Now I see three, right? And you
Uh-huh.
just keep on asking, how do I feel toward this, until you get to, I have such compassion for the struggle you're all in, and now you've reached self. So that's the first question. Just keep asking, how do I feel toward that? How do I feel toward that? And then the next question, once the parts have kind of given you space and you can focus on one of them, is what you said, to say, what are you afraid would happen if you didn't create this anxiety in me, right? And if you're really open, the part will usually begin saying, if I don't create the anxiety in you, then you won't perform well and you won't, do your best. I've got to light a fire under you. I say, oh, okay. And then what happens if I don't perform well? Well, then you'll be ridiculed and you'll be rejected and abandoned. Oh, when did that happen? Right. And usually that's pointing to, sometimes I'll ask, when was the first time that happened?
Uh-huh.
And you can go back and actually help the parts of you that are stuck back in that time, and again create this beautiful relationship that is now the foundation of, okay, so even if that happens now, I'm going to be there for you. Yeah, it's a beautiful process.
Absolutely. There was what you shared just made me think I was sort of cycling back through like I feel like in my own work there was almost like a new chapter that opened when I started exploring things that there was like a real inner critic that was like, you shouldn't even feel this way, like you should be
Mm-hmm.
better.
Yeah.
And like was keeping a lot of stuff suppressed. And then once I like renegotiated that and was like, hey, it's actually safe to
Mm-hmm.
feel these things. And I know that you feel shame, like you feel like you should be better. You feel shame for feeling these things. But like, what if we just explored it and trusted that nobody's going to leave us if we say these things? It was like this whole cast of parts all of a sudden started to come up that, you know, had been just pushed down and suppressed.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost just created like this whole new chapter of exploration.
Yeah.
And there's still, you know, there's still a part of me, and it'll come up in therapy where I'm like, when we get back to, because it seems like a lot for me, a lot of the things that I'm going through come back to that fear of abandonment
Yeah. Yeah.
and fear of like, nobody's going to love you if you do this, and everybody's going to leave you. But when
Mm-hmm.
I come back to that sort of core, it's like, oh God, are we here again? Is it really
Yeah.
that simple? Like, it just comes back, like all the myriad complexity of the human experience is really just coming back to, it's in so many ways, to this, like this one thing of, if,
Yeah.
you know, if I do this, or if I don't do this, then people are going to leave you. You know,
Uh-huh.
they're not gonna love you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, I don't want to cut you off. Yeah, no, it's so insightful too. And, you know, and so in IFS, what's amazing is that you can really identify the young parts of you. You can even ask
Mm.
that part
Mm-hmm.
that feels so afraid of abandonment, how old are you?
Yeah.
Right? And often it's a very young part. And
Yeah.
so it really makes sense that being abandoned at that age would lead to death even, right? It's the fear is really understandable. And it's almost like it's stuck back at that time
Right.
when maybe they were abandoned, right? By a caregiver, by a close friend or something like that, or they were humiliated or ridiculed or rejected in some way. And so, you know, in IFS, I call it time travel, but the current adult loving self, it's like a visualization. If you're familiar with like shamanic journeying or something like that, but you take that current loving self, you go back into that memory, and you are with that young part of you now. So they're not abandoned. They're not alone. It's not the same as living it over again and rehashing all of the
Right.
the difficulty. It's now I'm changing the memory. I'm with you. And then there's a beautiful practice in IFS where we actually retrieve them. We bring them out of the past into the present, where we continue to have that secure connection. We kind of, just like I was saying with the meditation, I encourage people. There are some IFS trainers that say once you bring a part out of the past into the present, to meet with them every day for 10, 20 minutes. I tell people, no, meet with them for 10 or 20 seconds because
Yeah.
whatever you will do is more important than what you won't do. And if it's too much, your system will say, I can't do that. But it's so important that you're just checking. And it's so amazing in the kind of inner world, time expands, and you can just go in and imagine, say that 5-year-old part, and say, I'm here with you. How are you doing today? Is there anything you need? It's just very quick. And what you're doing is you're like reparenting them, you're connecting with them to where now when a situation comes up that activates that feeling of abandonment, if you notice it, you say, oh, you turn toward the 5-year-old part. I feel you. I see that you're here. I'm with you. I'm with you. And it relaxes and then allows you to kind of take a little more risk and kind of see more clearly, is this person rejecting me? Maybe they are. Maybe the person is harmful in front of you, and the self says, it's okay, let's remove ourselves from this person, right? They're not treating you consistently with the way I'm treating you, and so that's okay, right? Or maybe let's hand them a little piece of our vulnerability and see how they handle it. something like that. But it really is that relationship between the self and bringing those parts out of the past into the present that I think heals the root, that you, like you're saying, that you keep coming to.
Yeah. I just want to voice some gratitude for what you just shared. And,
Mm,
I feel a lot of respect and gratitude in my body,
mm,
and just hopefulness that the people listening and watching this can really receive. And, because I'm like, I think what you just explained is like, took me like several years in therapy to like really get and have the experience with.
mm,
And so I just feel really good that we have this platform where we can have these kind of conversations, and that you are so willing and generous with your experience and the tools that you're using to help other people.
mm. Thank you for that appreciation. I feel it.
Yeah. I'm so happy we were able to connect again, because
Mm,
just for things exactly like that, like there's um I've never I've always felt with your content and what you share with people on social media, like that there's such generosity. There's never like, oh, I
mm,
have to hold this back, or, like, and there's a lot of trust in that like, oh, like this is going to resonate with people in the right way, or the way that they're able to meet it.
mm,
Um, and
mm,
there's an openness there, and yeah, generosity, I think, that I really admire.
mm. Thank you. I'm receiving that. I think, early on when I first started posting, on Instagram, it was a it was really an effort to. I remember saying, I don't care if anybody sees this. It's almost like I'm talking to myself
Yeah.
every time I show up. So, and it's so fascinating too, because sometimes, when you're making a video, you are actually looking at yourself.
Uh-huh.
And so in some ways, and I think it's actually helpful because there is a relief of, there's not a pressure, oh, I have to meet other people's expectations or I have to offer them something valuable. It's just always checking in with what's going on for me, and being authentic with that. And I think it's what I notice when you share that is just such a, I guess, a gratitude that you're able to receive that, right, and
Mm.
that you're able to um, like see that authenticity as generosity. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think it's a mirror that you're seeing your own generosity.
Mm. Yeah, it's just it's one of the things that like I really appreciate about having this podcast is, being able to meet people and have conversations like this where I can learn, and I can try to absorb what they're sharing. But also like, there's so many distractions and like things to navigate through in terms
Mm-hmm.
of social media and branding and all the noise, and like to get back to this conversation, to me it's like really connecting with why I want to have these conversations, like why I want to have this podcast and to share. And I feel like in my personal life right now, especially over the last few months, this huge theme that keeps coming up is like trusting, noticing, and then trusting how things feel in my body,
Yeah.
and really leaning into the things that feel good,
Mm-hmm.
And so like that's part of my experience right now, is like I'm just noticing how good this conversation feels, and just
Mm-hmm.
being like, yes, and more of that, please,
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. I think that's, Martha Beck talks about this. It's like the open the body compass that opens and expands and moves toward, because I think that whatever we are fascinated by, whatever our bodies move toward, that's life-giving for us, is the best way for us to serve the world, as we're
Yeah.
following that fascination. Because even the tiniest organism, right, will go toward what's nourishing for it and away from what's not, right? And so kind of trusting that very basic instinct, that maybe we've cut off, our parts of us have learned to cut off, to survive socially, reconnecting to that. So yeah, I love that too. I love that you're following your fascination, your passion.
I love that you just referred to it as a compass, like the body
Mm-hmm.
as a compass, because I've never heard anybody else refer to it like that. But when I started to explore this, that's the analogy that I've been using the whole time, is like that my
Yeah.
entire life I've lived in my head, and there's been this committee of,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
voices trying to like tell me what I should do or shouldn't do, and like why this is a good idea or a bad idea, and like directing. And then all of a sudden there was like this pull from the chest that
Mm-hmm.
completely like cut through all the voices.
Right.
And if all I do is just listen and follow that compass, I don't have to worry about all the voices and the wrong decisions,
Mm-hmm.
and that everything's going to work out exactly the way that it's supposed to,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
from following that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just been like this journey of like trusting that, learning how to work with the things that are like sort of jumping up in the way
Right.
of that, and then just really learning how to lean into that with different practices and different
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
things that I'm doing, so that I can
Yeah.
continue to trust it even more.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And again, it is going to come back to what we talked about at the beginning. I think, like you said, just little practices, right? Of like, what does it look like to trust what my body wants in this moment to wear, right? Do I want to wear
Yeah.
this or this? What pulls my body toward it? When I started listening to my body, I no longer wear anything that's uncomfortable to me. I wear all elastic band pants and,
Yeah.
because that's what my body wants. Um, and then with food or drink, right? Do I want to eat this? Sometimes, for lunch, I'll check, am I hungry right now? Oh, yes. Okay. Now I'm going to go through in my mind all of these different things I have and land on the one where my body goes, ooh, I want that. Right. And it's generally very surprising. People say, oh, well, isn't your body always going to want a gallon of ice cream? And I'm like, no, surprisingly not.
Right.
It's sometimes it wants a kale salad, believe it or not.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And so it's really interesting. When I first started it, again, kind of like the 30 minutes of meditation, I wanted to just listen to my body compass all the time. But what I would find was I would understand what my body compass was saying. It was saying, yes, go toward this. No, don't go toward that. And I would watch myself override it. It was like kind of having an out of body experience where my body was saying no, and I was going forward anyway,
Right.
because those parts that, again, so that's why I love IFS, because then I learned to work with those parts and say, okay, what are you afraid would happen if I moved forward with my body compass? And one of the biggest ones was the people pleaser part that said, you are going to disappoint people. You're going to be punished by them. You're even going to die. Like, you cannot do this. And so there were so many layers of healing for that part to then allow me to respond in that way to my body. Or there were other parts that said, it's selfish. You can't do what you want. That's, you got to do what you have to do. Or, like culturally burdened parts, different things like that. So it's a fascinating process. I actually have a self-paced course on this. That's the kind of the integration of our listening to our body compass and then how that fits with IFS.
Awesome. I think I'll check that out.
Yeah.
That's very cool. I had a question that might be a little bit of like a tangent, but still IFS related. And it's been something that's been, I feel like, helpful for me, but I'm curious what your sort of take on it is.
Mhm.
And that's been the practice of, as I've started to explore individual parts, naming them.
Yeah.
And like sort of like as a way, like I actually have a note in my phone where I have like a catalog of all the different parts that I've like really
Hmm.
explored and what they're about and what their names are. And like as I learn more about them through this exploration, I'll add to the note.
Right.
But I'm curious about what your take on that is, if that's a helpful thing to do.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I love this question. So it's interesting. So in IFS, we can name our parts at the beginning, but really we let the parts name themselves,
Yeah.
right? And so when we get to know a part, we can ask it, what would you like to be called? And if we are open, if we're really in that space of receptivity, kind of without thinking it up, I mean, sometimes it feels crazy what comes up, right? But I have a part named Maud. I I don't. I mean, I guess I was there a woman named Maud on the Golden Girls. I was like, I don't know if I know anyone with that name, but these old names, right? One's named Edna. There's Cassandra. I have several male parts, right? There's Sebastian. There are some parts that appear like. There's one that appears like Gollum from Lord of the Rings, so his
Ooh.
name is Gollum. So I received it. Now, sometimes when you go in, you can just name it something like that you observe, right? Oh, this is the angry part, right?
Uh,
And then you can ask the part, how do you feel about me calling you the angry part? And I remember that part was saying, no, 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 you are not understanding me. I
oh.
come across as angry, but at my core, I have self value. I value you. And I include your self agency and your self value. And this is actually Sebastian. So he told me his name was Sebastian. But he explained to me, that's not actually what I am. So you can ask parts, what do you want to be called, the procrastinator? And they'll say, no, I'm the freedom fighter, right? Like
Yeah.
my value for you is for you to have freedom and rest. And so, instead of having this kind of derogatory name, but or the taskmaster, right? Do you want to be called the taskmaster? And I'm like, no, I'm the driver. I'm the, I'm I have oomph, or they'll kind of explain their good intention. So anyway, the benefit though of having a name is that, if you think about any kind of name, uh, like even like strawberry, right? I'll say strawberry. It just in saying the name, what it conveys to you is a lot of information. It's this red fruit. It's sweet. You can feel how it tastes when you bite into it. You can see it in your mind. There's a lot of information attached to it. And then with people, there's this relationship, right? When you call them by name, there's a familiarity.
Yeah.
So, for example, I have a very harsh inner critic named Gollum, and he has certain choice words that he would like to use sometimes. And when I notice that come up in my system, I can turn toward it and say, oh, hey, Gollum, I see you. I see that you're here. And now there's this relationship. And now I'm calling them by name, and there's a familiarity. So I often say, at the beginning, when you have like a lot of parts and you don't really know who they are, what they are, they're very nebulous. It can feel like you're a junior high teacher starting on the first day with 7 periods of 25 kids, and they're just all a jumble, right? But
Uh-huh.
throughout the year, you begin to learn their names and characteristics about them. And, this is Oscar, and he likes this and he does that, and you can call them by name, and you have a familiarity with them, right? So that's why I think it's so helpful.
Yeah.
to have names.
Yeah. I do like what you just shared about like being able to relate to the part in a different way with that familiarity. Another way that it's helped me is in my relationship, with my partner,
Oh
where instead
yeah.
of like just getting triggered and getting angry, that we've held space for, like, I'll say, hey, like I have this part of me that gets really afraid when housework's not done, or like there's like dishes in the sink, because
Uh-huh.
and that part's name is Roberta. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
like I'll say like, hey, Roberta is feeling like really anxious about these dishes in the sink,
Yes.
and so it totally changes and diffuses the situation, rather than me being like, why isn't this done, or like, why is this happening, I'm angry about this, just to say like, oh, there's this part of me that's like not okay with this, or is having an issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's completely transformed the way that are relating to each other. Just
Mm-hmm.
that, even just having that reminder of like, oh, there's a part of me that feels this way, not the
Yeah.
whole self.
I love that you are able to name your parts to your partner. I think I have a similar relationship with my partner, Brian, where sometimes I'll say something and he'll say, "Oh, which part is this?"
Uh-huh.
Because he's so wonderful to let me tell him about all my parts and not think I'm crazy. And
Right.
he'll say, "Oh, is this Gollum? Is this Edna?" Or like I feel so seen and so known, even, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, and sometimes I haven't even thought about it, and I'll say, oh, yeah, this feels more like Gollum than Edna. Gollum's a much harsher critic
Uh-huh.
than Edna is,
Yeah.
and he'll say, oh, I wonder why Gollum's coming up. Like, what do you think he's protecting? And he can even, yeah, reflect that back for me, or I can say, yeah, again, it's not all of me, right? But I notice that this part of me that really worries, really wants to caretake you, right? And wants to fix your problems is coming up, right? So, so Maud's coming up and she really wants to do this, but I'm also aware that, and she's feeling helpless because she knows like there's nothing she can really do. And so myself is kind of trying to comfort her, and then I'm able to feel compassion for you. And again, it's just describing what's happening in me in real time, and
Yeah.
he's familiar, yeah, with my parts.
I love that we both have that, like that,
Yeah.
our partners saying, oh, this feels like a Golem situation here, like.
Yeah,
And
and it
then
can be it
sometimes
can be
and sometimes there's like
tricky.
sometimes there's like almost even like a correction, like,
No.
right, yeah, like, actually no, like, this is a different part, but thanks for the effort, and like, thank you for, like you said, for seeing me, and for willing
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
being willing to like hold space for it and be open instead of just shutting down, right?
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. um I also wanted to ask you about nonviolent communication, because I
Mm-hmm.
noticed, like, I watch your content and read it, and I was really excited earlier this year. It seemed like you started to weave that in, or have like sort of a separate series on what
Yeah.
nonviolent communication was, and um, it's been a pretty cool process for me to integrate some of that as well. So I'm wondering
Mm-hmm.
if you could just maybe like real briefly explain what that is, and what the value is for people.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I actually learned nonviolent communication before I learned IFS. I feel like it was
Oh,
maybe one of those things that helped me kind of recognize IFS, but at the time it was a little bit of a challenge for my system. Now I understand, for
uh-huh.
protective parts of me that like grew up in an authoritarian system that
Yeah.
says, you use shame and blame and judgment and control and manipulation, and that's just the way things are. You do that in any kind of relationship of hierarchy, especially parent to child, teacher to student, boss, that kind of thing. That's just, to me, that's the air we breathe. That's the system we're kind of born into. So there were a lot of parts of me, particularly religiously burdened parts, that were really resistant. But I feel like myself really resonated, and I was pulled forward to learn about it. So it's nonviolent communication was developed by Marshall Rosenberg, and I believe he might have started in the 70s with it, but it's really about, his theory is, and this is where it fits so well with IFS, that we actually are educated to use judgment and shame and blame. That at our core, we actually want to give from our hearts naturally to other people. And whenever we don't want to, it's only because our needs are not being met. And so it's not a shame or anything. It's just, oh, I'm not feeling that natural flow toward another person. So I need to turn my energy inside and say, what's the unmet need going on for me? And that once our needs are met, we will naturally want to give to others. So he has, nonviolent communication has these 4 components of observations, feelings, needs, and requests. So he says, as humans, we do make judgments, right? But it's just about owning the judgment and finding out, well, what's my observation behind it? Like if I say, you're so rude, that could mean a ton of different things to different people, right? So how am I defining that? What have I specifically seen? And so if I can say, well, the last 3 times I tried to call you, you didn't answer the phone. Like that's like a factual observation of what I am judging or interpreting as rude. So if I can speak more in clear observation, then people can respond better to that. And then again, it's not that we're bad for making judgments. It's what Marshall calls a tragic expression of our unmet needs, because it really is like our protective parts lashing out, and then the other person's protective parts are just going to become entangled, and you're never going to get sight of what are the needs underneath. So our feelings, the next one is feelings. Our feelings, it's kind of like that body compass. They point us to whether our needs are met or not. So if we feel happiness and contentment, it's usually because our needs are being met. If we feel anger, if we feel sadness and frustration and fear, there's some unmet need going on. Now, I often will say, for me, if we have big emotions, there's usually TNT underneath. There's unhealed trauma, unmet needs, or untrue thoughts, which are usually held by parts of us for certain reasons. So those kind of explosive emotions are really helpful because they point us to what's underneath. There's something going on there, right? So then we can get curious. And in nonviolent communication, there's 9 universal needs. So we can go through and say, is it this? Is it this? Is it this? And when you land on the need, you go, oh, yes, that's what I need. And what I found is when our emotions are the biggest, you often go through the 9 needs and you're like, this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one, and this one are unmet.
Right.
And you realize, oh, no wonder I'm feeling so upset. And it's actually pointing me to that. So another thing with needs is wonderful is that because there are 9 universal human needs, once I get to the needs of another person, I feel connection, because I'm like, oh, I don't like the way you're trying to get that need met, but I have the same needs. So I get it. I get that you have that need and I want your need to be met. Maybe it's not me that can meet it, but I still want it to be met. Right. Yeah. So then the last one is requests. Instead of, we never make demands. We say, can you do this? And if a person says no, it's actually a gift to us, because what they're saying is, I have a competing need. I can't do that. So we might get flexible with the strategy we have, right? So anyway, it's so compatible with IFS to me, because what I found was, in my experience, the capital S self naturally speaks NVC. And it does that on the inside with parts inside of us and parts outside of us. So if I come to another person and I find that I cannot for the life of me give them empathy or compassion, it's not because I'm a terrible person. It just means I need to go inside and give loving attention to whatever's alive in me, listen to it. I am so frustrated because they did. And I'm like, yes, tell me why you're frustrated. Okay, what's wrong? Tell me what you need. And then once I know what the need is, the parts of me relax, and then I naturally emerge with more calm and curiosity and compassion toward the parts that are active in the other person. So again, that's my observation, is that we bring self-energy to the vertical relationship with ourselves, and then we have the capacity to bring self-energy to people outside of us, and that our self just naturally speaks nonviolent communication. So that's it in a big nutshell.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, it's been a real exploration for me. Like personally, one of the things that I've learned about myself is that it's a challenge for me to express my needs.
Yeah.
Because of the way that I grew up. It's almost like I've spent so much time attending to other people's needs. And
Right.
there are parts of me that are very resentful of that and have begun to
Mm-hmm.
like rebel and say like, no, we're not doing this anymore because we don't want to do that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I remember like the first time of us sitting down and, have this sheet of needs like printed out and laminated. We have
Yeah.
a couple of them around the house, and my partner's sitting down and being like, tell me what your needs are. And
Mm.
I'm like, I mean, you might as well have been speaking a foreign language, like, I'm like, what do you
Yeah.
mean? Like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah. And you make sense. I mean, there's, again, whatever blocks the way is the part that
Yeah.
says, how dare you even have needs? How dare you be human? How dare you ask for your needs to be met? Oh my goodness, right? And
Yeah.
somehow that part got that message, from whether it's a cultural burden, probably very personal burdens as well,
Uh-huh.
experiences where you were punished when you expressed your needs, and just really validating that part, right? That you make sense. And again, like we've talked about, can I go back to that when that happened to you, and see your needs in that moment?
Yeah.
Can I repair that moment for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I just had a little thought I'm going to make a note of for later, which is great. I love when that happens. Um, yeah, I love the request part as well. That was
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that our therapist that, uses authentic relating and nonviolent communication suggested for us, is like giving ourselves the permission and the space to refuse requests
Yeah.
unconditionally and
Yeah.
without like question. And that was like a game changer for me because it felt really unsafe to say no, even to things that I didn't want to do, you
Right.
know? And so it's like, there's been situations where it's like, hey, can you do this? And I'm like, no. Well, why? And I'm like, because I said no. And that's the end. Like, I don't even need to go into anything
Yeah.
else. Like, just saying no is okay. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, it's turned into a really beautiful exploration and something that I'm really grateful for on these different levels. Like in a completely different context. Um, I had a recent employment situation
Mm.
where some of the conversations that we were having were quite challenging, and
Yeah.
yet through some of the tools that I've learned, I was able to take a step back and not personalize what was happening and see those needs that the other person was expressing
Yeah.
rather than personalizing it about something about me. And I remember getting off this one conversation and going and talking with my partner and saying, I
Mm,
am so grateful that we've been seeing our person for so long, because
mm-hmm.
if I hadn't been doing that, I would have completely blown up that conversation. Like there's no
Mm-hmm.
way that I would have been able to be present, be professional, be non-judgmental and non-reactive.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
this is all from the work that we've done.
Yeah.
And I can see it so clearly in that context, because I can feel those different parts, like wanting to rebel and like wanting to react and like
Mm-hmm.
having the capacity to just hold that and observe it,
Mm-hmm.
and use different resources.
Yeah.
Um, and for me, like the beauty of that is that like literally the first session that we had with this person, they said, well, what are your goals? What do you want to get out of this? And my partner was like, well, I want to be heard. I want,
Mm-hmm.
better communication. I want X, Y, and Z. And they came to me and I said, um, I think this is all kind of a crock, and I'm just here because I care about my partner.
Mm-hmm.
And that's literally the only reason that I'm doing it, is because it's
Mm-hmm.
important to her.
Yeah.
But I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm very, I don't know about this stuff, and like, so to go from that to like, well, I don't really believe this, but I'm going to give it a shot because I care about this other person, to
Yeah.
like, oh, actually I've integrated this into my life and like I'm seeing the value and the gifts of being able to
Mm-hmm.
practice and have more tools in my tool belt. Is just like, oh, so beautiful.
I love that. I love that description of like seeing someone like basically acting out and feeling curious, like,
Yeah.
oh, I love the phrase that Marshall uses. It's a tragic expression of their unmet needs, right?
Uh-huh.
Because it's often will elicit another reactive defensive response in the other person. But if your system is, like you said, able to see it as a signal to curiosity, oh, I wonder what's going on for them. I wonder what wound might
Uh-huh.
have been, activated, or what unmet need they're having, right? I, often say you can't have judgment and curiosity at the same time. So, like dropping into that curiosity, even if the other person is screaming, and there's a commercial on during the Super Bowl, it reminds me of, where it was all these scenes of people violent, right, yelling and screaming at each other, and just scene after scene. And I remember I watched it and I thought, oh, really protective parts, unmet needs, protective parts, really valuing that person, unmet needs, right? I was just like, wow, these people's parts are so feeling so threatened, and there's something really valuable underneath that they're protecting. I wonder what it is.
Yeah.
So, and it's much harder when it's directed at you. But
Sure.
when you can realize that whenever any other person is activated, it's always about them. I'm not
Right.
saying that we're not responsible for how we treat people, and obviously we can hurt people and all of that. But likewise, whenever we get really activated, it's about us, right? So if you would have
Uh-huh.
responded in that way, and it would have been about the parts of you that were activated. And again, there's no wrong. It's just you make sense for for
Right.
feeling that way.
Yeah. Yeah. To take it back to like my example of Roberta, it's like, instead of
Mm-hmm.
being like, realizing that instead of I'm upset with my partner because there's dishes in the sink, when I was growing up, my mom would yell at us if there were dishes in the sink. And that's why there's
Right.
this feeling in my body of this isn't safe. This isn't okay. And why don't you get that?
Yeah.
Like complete reframe, complete shift in understanding myself, and also like understanding why it's not a big deal for them, because they didn't grow up in that situation. Like they have a totally different set of dangers and
Mm-hmm.
scenarios that aren't safe, and and that I can learn
Mm-hmm.
how to be a better partner and like better navigate and support them and their parts and their nervous system as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. It's so amazing to have a partner that supports your work, that understands your parts, that is patient, and kind. I often will say, there's like three different kinds of interaction. There's part to part, where and any relationship can have all three of these at any given moment, but um, that when one person's parts interacting with another, and that's usually really messy and can cause a lot of issues. And then the ideal is self to self, right? When you're both in self and able to kind of not take things personally and get curious about each other's parts. But the middle one is when one person's in self and the other is in a part.
Right.
And that can also be effective, because if this person kind of has done their work and their parts are calm, they can get curious and offer self energy to the other person's part that's active and help kind of disarm it. And of course, we can't do that if we haven't give attention. If we're in our own protective parts, we have to go do that vertical relationship and give attention there first. But um, just being able to offer that to each other. I know there were parts of me who were very skeptical of people in general. Nobody can be a safe person. And I remember myself telling me, my capital S self, at one point, you can always trust another person's self. You can never trust their parts. And that was just so clarifying to me. Like, yeah, there will be times when someone is in their protective parts and they may not be able to have my best interests at heart. And it's okay for me to take distance or do what I need to do. But if someone is in self and they're having those qualities, I can trust that. And so learning what that feels like in my own system, then I can recognize it in other people who tend to be more in self with me and tend to be more safe. Um, and maybe we can go back and forth and offer self to each other.
That's beautiful. We our our person suggested or like pointed out like almost coming into, like, even if it's like an argument or like something where like a discussion that's kind of confrontational, but like
Mm-hmm.
coming into it like a ceremony.
Mm.
And they use the example of like because we're both like we both have experience with ayahuasca. It's like, would
Mm-hmm.
you would you just like go into the maloka and start drinking medicine without like protective prayers and setting, and like that's what you're
Uh,
doing when you start like just going at each other. And so like
yeah.
literally there have been situations where like, even though initially it's like part to part and it's starting to get confrontational,
Mm-hmm.
one of us will stop and say, hold on a second, like
Yes.
let's open this container, let's create the ceremony. And
Mm.
even doing that starts to bring us more into the self.
Yeah.
And it might not be complete in that moment, but it at least
Mm-hmm.
starts to like diffuse and alchemize the energy into self to self or self to part, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how can
Mm-hmm.
I hold the space for your part and lend that self energy, or vice versa, and also checking in and being like, is this okay right now? And
Yeah.
sometimes it's not. Sometimes like we need to hit pause and come back when we
Yep.
can be more grounded and more in
Mm-hmm.
self.
Yeah. 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 It's interesting. There was a woman this morning asking me this question because she's preparing to have this kind of conversation that she wants to use nonviolent communication in, and said, what happens if my parts get activated? If the other person says certain things, lashes out at me, and then I feel activated, what do I do? And I said, well, I can tell you what I've learned to do. And with loved ones, I have a very specific language. I'll say, ooh, I'm noticing that there's parts of me that are getting really activated. And so I'm going to take a time away, because for me, I really do need to be in a private place, but it might be for 5 minutes in the bathroom or the closet or something. And then I will come back and speak for those parts to you. Or just some kind of language. With my kids, it was, mommy needs a timeout. With my partner, it was, I'm activated, I need some alone time, and I will come back. And again, that it's creating that space, first recognizing that the parts are active and not just pushing forward as them. That takes a lot of practice even in itself to do. But then, again, experimenting with it to show your system if it's effective or not. But then taking that moment to really tend to that vertical relationship. And I would go in the closet and I would say, oh my gosh, beloved, you're so upset. You're so angry. You're so angry. And that part would say, yes, I am, and I'm really having this relationship with whatever's alive in me. And then I can come back. And so my spouse and my kids and whoever I'm dealing with, they then get evidence that, wow, this is really helpful. When Christine or when mom, goes on timeout, she comes back more in self is essentially what would happen. I'm more calm. I'm more clear-minded, right? And can speak for my parts. So I think noticing when we're activated and taking a little bit of space to have that vertical relationship is a wonderful practice. It's not, it's not an avoidance. It's not a stomping out and not saying where you're going and if never coming back. That's a different part.
Right. Well, we've gone twice the duration that we did last time, and I feel like we're still just scratching the surface, which is such a pleasure and such a joy to have these type of conversations where it just feels so fresh, even after we've been talking for almost an hour and a half. And I do need to wrap it up. And I also want to respect your time as well. But thank you so much for again coming and sharing your experience and your wisdom and these beautiful perspectives and tools that we can utilize and integrate into our own experience.
Yeah. Thank you, Jonathan. It's an honor to share space with you and just to give and receive insight and witness. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. So you mentioned your group. Are there any other things that you'd like to mention for people wanting to work with you and connect?
Yeah. Well, so I have several online kind of self-paced courses. I think all of them are $42 each, but they each contain maybe 5 hours of teaching and group demos and kind of exercises, worksheets you can use if you want, journal prompts, things like that. But there's one on just IFS 101, just the basics of IFS if you want to learn about that. And then the others are kind of integration of IFS with other things. So there's self-compassion in IFS, and then there's body compass in IFS, and then nonviolent communication in IFS. So those are there. There's also some internal family systems worksheets that I've created just to kind of help. Sometimes it can help guide getting to know the parts and things like that. I have some meditations on my website. I do have the group that meets every Tuesday, but it opens every quarter. So the next time it will open, I think will be in July. And then I have a 6-week group. If you want to be on the mailing list, you can just DM me and I can let you know when the smaller group, which is a 6-week kind of immersive Learn IFS experience, if you want to be notified of that. But I think that's about it right now.
Are you still selling your deck of cards?
You know what? I ran out of inventory.
Oh, how wonderful.
I know.
I'm going to celebrate that.
Yeah, that is a good thing. And so I'm debating, maybe I'll get some more, maybe around the holidays or something like that.
We'll definitely
But
keep an eye out for that, because I've turned a few people onto it. They've come back and said, I got this deck. Thank you for that. And
oh, yay.
I use them in my integration circles when there's
Uh-huh.
like a lull. Like sometimes, it's like sometimes people have lots to share and there's a lot of conversation, but if there's too much of a lull and no one's coming forward, I'll be like, who's up for a 2-minute exercise?
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, and it's worked really well. So for the listeners, definitely take a look at Christine's website and keep an eye out for that, because it's a really helpful resource full of different 2-minute exercises that you can do for IFS and mindfulness and nonviolent communication, and just really cool things that only take a couple of minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm all about making it small.
Right? Nothing wrong with that. That's the
Yeah.
way in, right?
It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
cool. Well, thank you again, Christine, so much for being here. And I hope for the listeners, if you haven't listened to the first episode with Christine, go back and check that out, because it was so informative and insightful, and really set the foundation for some of the things that we discussed a little bit more in depth in this talk. And, I really hope that this conversation inspired you to take that next micro step, like this transformation thing, in whatever way that appears or you define it. Doesn't have to be this big, overwhelming thing. We can really just take it a moment at a time, 10 seconds at a time, a few breaths at a time. And from that perspective, we can really enter the stream, so to speak, and continue to grow and increase our capacity. So, that's my vital point for the day, is just, start slow and take it from where you're at. And I hope
Yeah.
that this conversation inspired you to do that. I sincerely hope you found value and inspiration in this episode. If it struck a chord with you, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could take a moment and leave a review for the show. It's a simple, cost-free way to show support and help more like-minded people discover the show. It's just the way the algorithms work. Also, make sure you sign up for my newsletter at bluemagicalchemy.com to be the first to get updates, exclusive content, and insights delivered straight to your inbox. It's a fantastic way to stay connected and keep the learning journey going. When you sign up, I'll send you a free guide to using breathwork for integration as a way to show my gratitude for your support. Remember, it's not about the method you choose or the pace at which you travel. The vital point is to consistently show up for yourself and practice. As the saying goes, it's not the destination, but the journey that truly matters. And I'd be honored to accompany you on yours. Thanks again for tuning in. Until the next episode, keep exploring, keep growing, and above all, keep practicing, because that's the vital point.